Kia ora and welcome to How to Smash the Motherhood Penalty, the podcast where we get curious about a system where all parents pay some kind of a price, but it's only mothers that are paying a financial price. I'm your host, Emma McLean. I'm an executive coach and a mum of three. Join me as I interview experts in all different fields on what the motherhood penalty is, how it impacts us, and what we can do to smash it. Hi, it's your friend Emma. Welcome back. Today, I am delighted to be speaking with Michelle Allbon and Julia Bauer, and they are from a progressive business that they have created called the Fractional Directory. I'm going to let Michelle and Julia talk about what that business is, but I want to share a story around how me and Michelle met. And I guess this is a lesson, that's not a lesson, because I'm not preaching to anyone here, people, but, you know, when you put something out into the world, you will find your people. And I guess when I did the part-time power list this year, Michelle reached out to me. And Michelle reached out on LinkedIn and she said, oh my goodness. She probably didn't say, oh my goodness, but it was similar to that. She said, oh my goodness, you are talking my language. I need to meet you. This sounds like something we are so aligned with. And so I had a meeting with Michelle and she told me about the fractional directory. I'd kind of heard about fractional working, but I think that it's really important to talk about it to my audience. And so I invited Michelle and Julia on. And I guess it's just the thing, which is like, put the work that you want to make out into the world and trust the universe and find your people. And I found my people with Michelle and Julia. And I'm going to just kick it off by asking Julia to introduce yourself, your business, throw it to Michelle, and we'll just do a little triple act today. Kia ora and welcome, Julia.
Oh, thank you so much for having us. I'm really excited to be here. The best way to start is to talk about how Michelle and I met, because it's an interesting story and it really leans into the you put yourself out there and you'll find your people. So Michelle and I actually met at an antenatal class. We were having our first children back in 2021. And you know, when you have kids, you're making friends with people that have kids. You're not really talking about work. You're just talking about, you know, is your baby sleeping and all of those kinds of good things. So I think we got about 6 months into knowing each other, and I was just thinking about returning to work, and Michelle said, oh, what do you do? And I said, oh yeah, I'm a software engineer. And she said, that is so funny, I'm in tech too. And we had no idea. We'd been friends for 6 months already with just no idea what we did in our quote unquote previous life. So that was really cool. We attended a couple of conferences together. We never worked together really. And then I started learning about what Michelle did, and that was completely different. She was operating as a fractional CRO, and I was like, awesome. What's a CRO and what is fractional? I had absolutely no idea.
Good questions.
Yeah. Do you want to continue on the story, Michelle?
Yeah. So it was really funny because in part of the transition of going from a working professional to a mother, I think we met at the most raw point in our identities that both of us have ever had, where we've really had these, you know, having kids in our 30s, we had these professional hats kind of fused to us. And then all of a sudden we did this hard shift of we're moms and we're an antenatal and we're not even talking about professional life. And I love the concept of matrescence, where you're trying to weave back these two parts of yourself. And Jules and I found each other at this kind of peak moment of matrescence, where we were trying to figure out kind of both what our identities are as mothers and as professionals. And it was really interesting. Obviously, as an introduction to both of us, I'm the CEO of the Fractional Directory and Jules is the CTO. But at the time, we didn't even have any intention of starting a company. We just kind of both started talking about the things that we were passionate about. And, you know, I'll define what fractional is, but it was that interest and that aligned kind of intellect and passion that we have that started our company. And it was the first thing I think we both had that wasn't just our pure motherhood identity. And so we really just dove into it head first because it felt almost like cathartic to have something else to think about when you're in the weeds.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, I love that. I love that you met as real people or just as people, as new mums. And then you started talking about, wow, what do you do for work? And exploring what this fractional thing is. I mean, Michelle, what is fractional working? Can you define that?
Yeah. So that was the first question Jules, of course, asked me was what is a fractional CRO and what is fractional?
Mm.
And as you can hear in my accent, I'm originally American. I married a Kiwi, and that's how I ended up here. And we moved here actually from London in 2020. So when we met, I was a recent immigrant to New Zealand. And the concept of fractional work was starting to get a little bit more organized around North America, but it wasn't really a thing here. People were calling it virtual, like there was virtual CMOs and virtual CFOs. But the difference between virtual and fractional was fractional just basically means being an integrated senior leader in a company, not 5 days a week. So you're just working for a fraction of your full-time capacity. And otherwise, it pretty much feels like you're still in a senior leadership role. And it applies to every major line of business, sales, marketing, finance. There's fractional CEOs. But that concept of part time often comes with a really big stigma around it and kind of a you can't really work at your full capacity. Whereas fractional in and of itself came in through private equity and venture capital, and kind of the startup space is where it's really taken off to start with. And the challenging notion is maybe you don't actually need people 5 full days to be at full capacity for a leadership role. So it is almost challenging the notion of part-time and saying, what if full-time was just 2 or 2.5 days? And that is what the entire industry is now, is people who are leaving full-time work and choosing instead to have what's called a portfolio career, where instead of working with one company 5 days a week, they're working in fractions of themselves in a variety of engagements, sometimes fully embedded, which is what fractional is being completely embedded and integrated. Like they didn't have another chief revenue officer in the companies I've worked in. Or you might be doing bits and pieces like advisory work and consulting projects, but you're untethered from the 5 day work week. And so I was more familiar with this because of my network and coming from North America. But now, as we've been experimenting over the last 2.5 years, it's well and genuinely a global market that has opened up. And so we've kind of accidentally became these first movers in a space that is now evolving and starting to become more than just a future of work topic. It's actually like a present work topic. And that kind of is what's brought us into building the company, and 2 months ago kind of quitting everything else we were doing and going full time on it.
Amazing. So when you say, Michelle, fractional workers are fully embedded into a company, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so traditionally when you think about a consultant or you think about working part-time is the closest thing because you're basically just a part-time senior leader, but nobody is necessarily expecting somebody who's working 2 or 3 days a week necessarily to run the core strategy around building or transforming or triaging something really critical or important, or being the person who's leading a company to exit. And those kind of four key areas are what fractionals are excellent at. And they're also in companies for between 6 and 18 months usually. And part-time, you might just be part-time for a decade. So there's kind of this nature of that you feel like the senior leader in the company, but everybody kind of knows that your days there are limited and that your full time in the company is limited. And so it changes the dynamic of how everybody in the company works with you, because you're running teams, you're in all the senior leadership meetings. And this is if you're in a big enough company, or if you're in a small startup, you're working directly with the founders. But this idea of being embedded means that you're not doing a project and leaving, which is consulting. You're not advising and saying, hey, go do this, and then kind of staying on the sidelines. You're being relied upon as much as if you were the de facto person in a leadership team. Everyone just has to adjust their mindset about that you don't work on Tuesdays or Thursdays or whatever capacity they have you in the company.
Yeah. So when you say that back to me, it feels like you'd have an email address, right, of the
Yep.
company, different from freelancing. You'd be included on company cascades
Correct.
and let into the loop on confidential stuff if you were on that leadership team, different from a consultant, different from a freelancer. You are embedded. And for me, and again, I want to throw it to Julia in a minute, but that feels like work that is really important to people in terms of it being worth it. So when we talk about parents, one of the things that I have noticed is that when we go back to work, for a certain proportion of parents, yes, we're going back for money, but we're actually going back because the work needs to be worth it. And this model sounds like you're creating work that's worth it, right? And so I love that. So, Julia, tell us about the Fractional Directory, where you are right now in your business, and specifically tell me, like, how has it resonated in New Zealand? Because you guys will tell me because you're a global business now, but I'm interested in the New Zealand experience.
Yeah, great question. So, where we're at now, we're about 2.5 years into our journey. And now, when we started, we were working on other jobs. I had 4-day a week out of 5 job. I had a freelancing gig. I was solo parenting. So there was, not a lot of free time. And Michelle was working multiple fractional gigs, coaching, advisory. We were very busy. And apparently that's the best time to start a new business.
Apparently.
As you know, what we did is we kind of got into this accidentally. And we created this experiment, and we went from 0 to launching in 90 days. And we launched the Fractional Directory version 1, which for anyone who saw it at the time, it's quite different to how it is today. But essentially, the core idea was the same, is we wanted to map everybody that works in a fractional capacity at the time, just in New Zealand. And we started out with 42 profiles. So if you think that was in not even 2.5 years ago, that was 2 years ago, September 2023, we launched with 42 profiles in New Zealand. Today, we have 600 in New Zealand and 2,000 globally, and that's across New Zealand, Singapore, Western Australia, and as of last week, Sydney. So it's growing at a crazy rate, and we had no idea what to expect at the start because, like I said, this was an experiment. We already had jobs. We weren't looking to become founders. We weren't looking to build a unicorn business, but we worked really well together and it took off, and it was just, great timing, obviously great skills. It wasn't just luck, but there was a lot of things that came into it. And Michelle and I are a bit of like a yin and yang in business. She does all the business side, I do all the tech side, and we overlap in really complementary ways. So fast forwarding to almost 2.5 years later, where we're at now is we're in 3 countries. We're in 2 locations in Australia and growing. We are now full-time on this business, not fractional, full-time. We're fighting the good fight for everyone else to be fractional. And I mean, it's busy.
Yeah.
It's busy.
I'll just say that.
We have 1 and 4-year-olds. We somehow both ended up having our second kids right around the time we were expanding into Singapore. So unlike a lot of people who talk in retrospect about looking backwards and making a decision to change their career, we're in it. Like we are in the weeds, and we are fighting from the weeds for a better future structure for ourselves. And I think that's really important context.
Yeah. And you asked how the response has been in New Zealand. It's been really interesting because when we started, fractional was not a term that a lot of people used, and we were coming in and trying to define it globally. And that's the work that Michelle's also been doing with the FLA, is creating a global standard of what is fractional. Because you see online a lot of ads for fractional admin, fractional project manager, all sorts of different roles. And we're not saying that they're not, but we've got our own definition that we are doubling down on, because we see fractional work as leadership roles, as strategic roles. And so the response in New Zealand at the start was a bit of confusion. There were some really great people doing that work, but they weren't being recognized for that. So for us to be able to come in and give them this, essentially a platform to be discovered, was really, really exciting for people, but for the very few people that were doing it. And as we grew, people started understanding what it meant. They started being able to identify themselves. We have this thing we call the talent qualification engine, and this is how people can articulate their skills. And a lot of people, in New Zealand, there's a lot of generalist leaders. I can do a bit of this, I can do a bit of that. And you find people through your networks like, oh, talk to Bob down the road. He worked for my company. He could help you out. And that's all really great. But we're trying something a little different. We want people to be very, very specific and precise about their top skills that they offer, and only offer that. So you can pick a single or a double major, as Michelle calls it, which is 1 or 2 leadership positions. And we only have 17 to choose from. And then you go down and you get very, very precisely qualified into your role. So for some people, it's validating that they have these skills. For other people, it's articulating skills that they weren't sure how to. And for some, it's choosing and sticking to your core skills. And so the response over the last 2 years has been first confusion, a little bit of maybe anger, and then acceptance, and then excitement. And now people are loving it. We're doing every 2 months, we do a fractional meetup in Auckland, because that's where we live. And we started from having a couple of people and just a few familiar faces to 2 years on filling a room, having to get a conference room. We have a wait list for a meetup in Sydney. It's really, really growing, and it's really exciting to be right at the front of that wave.
It's epic. I love that. And what I'm curious about is, I have no doubt you have a lot of demand from people wanting to work fractionally. But what I see as the pain point is companies being open to senior roles being delivered fractionally.
Definitely.
And that's the culture change, or the structural change, or whatever change. And what are you guys doing about that?
Jules is looking squarely at me, the fractional CRO and CEO. I bemoaned this because at the beginning, I thought the problem was that people just didn't know it was an option. And when we first did all of our research for our product, I went and interviewed a bunch of leaders and a bunch of founders and said, what would it take for you to hire fractionally? And everyone went, oh, well, you just need some use cases. You just need to prove to people that it's credible. And I thought, okay, right. And then what started happening is, out of the weeds, I found all kinds of people who were working fractionally in New Zealand. And I was like, these are epic use cases. So I took that advice and I started kind of trying to engage in that. And then I realized that actually we're stumbling upon a much bigger piece of culture change and quite a lot more layers than we first thought. And when we went to Singapore and then when we entered Australia, I kind of connected the dots for me that this is more than just a conversation of talking companies into hiring fractionally. It's actually a productivity conversation, which comes into government policy and comes into the structure of work within countries. So by the time that this is out, we will have been able to publicly announce that we have a contract with the government of Singapore to actually walk 15 companies through hiring in a fractional model as a way to showcase and test out a way of having alternative productivity for senior leaders. And Singapore as a government is very, very interested in seeing how people can use something like this to be more effective and to not have to work 5 days a week. In New Zealand, our productivity model is based on a 5-day work week. And this is a place that we've actually kind of hit walls over and over again, as soon as we've gotten to the system and structures that are holding together all of this opportunity of getting in front of companies, everyone's kind of politely rebranding it as consulting. And the unlock that I had is, well, that's because if we get half of New Zealand fractional jobs, we're going to reduce New Zealand's productivity unless somebody changes our government policy. And this is something that's really provocative. And the same in Australia. There's these discussions happening right now where actually companies are interested. This is happening, but the structures that help companies articulate and admit that this is how they're working are being held back by the bigger structure of work. So we're finding that having these kinds of conversations and honestly just kind of speaking truth to power is what it's just become, is us getting in front of the right microphones and honestly speaking about what's going on. And we are trying to change the structure of work in Asia Pacific.
Just a small job then. Yeah, this is the thing. Want change? Give it to 2 women with 2 children under 5 and they'll sort it out. You know, when I hear you talk that back, Michelle, for me, that all resonates because I feel like I also work in this underlying structure of work and what is considered productive and how we've designed it. And designed it is actually a generous term because I don't think this is designed. And it's so pervasive, right? It's so pervasive. Can't even say that word. An example is I was on a call last week. It was on a Global Women call, and it was a webinar trying to improve the understanding about the pay gap. And one of the recommendations is that we look for senior part-time work, or we look to create that leadership teamwork on reduced hours. And one of the participants who said, you know, I get that's a recommendation, but clearly that's impossible for companies to do that, right? And that maybe what we need to do is work on the actual person and figure out, well, how could we keep them without that? And then I had to take myself off mute and go, no, it's not impossible. It's just that we lack the imagination to make it possible. You know what I mean? And so,
and there's a really big misunderstanding of this of what are you doing with time? And that's a really key piece of the tech that we've built, is that we found that people don't understand how to hire for strategic work. It's very easy if you need something like a logo built or something that's very tactical to go find a freelancer to do it for you. But if you're hiring a CMO or if you're hiring a head of product, like, how do you explain what outcomes you want them to do? And that's what we have actually really created in our data model, is that articulation of what needs to go on an SOW. What does somebody explicitly need to do for a company in order to justify their role? And it can only be 3 or 4 things. And if you accomplish that in 6 to 18 months, you have fundamentally changed the company's structure. But it's getting people comfortable and okay with people being in the room who are change agents. And I think that is not every culture, and that is not every founder or every board who is willing to kind of bring somebody in the room who the whole entire purpose is to actually call things out and make change. And so I think where we're starting to see this better and better is in people telling behind closed doors, other people they know, the secret that they hired a part-time CMO or a part-time CTO, and it's actually fractional. And they think they're getting a great deal because they're not having to pay them a full wage. But I'm like, let's take this out of the behind the scenes and actually just publicly admit and celebrate how many people are already doing this work in New Zealand.
Yes. Something interesting we found is, you know, as a tech person, I want to solve problems using technology. And I thought it would be as easy as, let's build a tool that helps people understand what problems they need to solve, not just, hey, I'm looking for a CMO, hey, I'm looking for a CTO. We literally launched a product less than 6 months ago, and it's like a guided discovery. It's what are the strategic challenges of your business? And this is our core product that we're working on so hard, day in, day out, to make it as easy as possible. Because a lot of companies, a lot of founders, CEOs, they don't necessarily know what they need. They know what they want to solve. And so we thought, okay, build it and they'll come. And unfortunately, that hasn't worked out in the same way that we were expecting, because like Michelle said, there's so much more wrapped up in this than just, hey, you've got this problem, here's a person, we've found them, they've got the exact skills you need, why don't you go ahead and hire them? We've made it easy. I've built something that you can basically, you can reduce 2 hours of discovery time to 2 minutes,
Yeah.
and I've demonstrated this over and over again, that it cuts down the time like crazy. But the problem is, that's not the problem. Once people are ready and understand what they're doing, that is great. But it's everything that comes before that. And that's the sort of, not the fight, but that's the big fight that we're fighting right now, is the education, the understanding, the challenging the norms of work, understanding what productivity means, and in different countries and different areas, what that means to different people.
And I'm going to
Yeah.
throw one more stat out there, which is the last time we looked, it was about 70% of the directory that are either return Kiwis from overseas or immigrants like myself. And that is a whole entire piece of this, is that people are scared to hire someone they don't personally know, but you probably won't personally know someone who's only returned to New Zealand in the last few years.
Yeah.
And that also doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't brilliant and the right person for the job. So there's kind of these layers and layers that we're having to undo to really get people to sit with us and go, I'm willing to be curious, to use a free search engine to even think about hiring in the model. And I think we're just starting to get there.
I love that. I want to go into the motherhood penalty and get your thoughts on it, but I just want to finish on the fractional directory. And I want to ask either Michelle or Julia, if we have an employer listening to this who hires for their C-suite, for their GMs, what's your pitch? Like, why should they consider coming on board with the fractional directory, partnering with you to find the people they need or the outcomes they want? Who would like to give me a 2 or 3 sentence pitch? Miss Michelle is being nominated.
Yeah, that sounds a bit of me. Yeah. So I think the number one thing is, if somebody is listening who hires at all, if you have headcount, you're probably just assuming that headcount means full time and you have no other parameter for that. Or you're saying, we'll bring in a consultant to do something tactical. So what I am challenging everyone to think of is, instead of going either consultant or full-time person, the question is, what is the domain gap? And by domain, I mean the area of business that is lacking. Is it operations? Is it finance? Is it AI? Is it technology broadly? Like, what domain is it that you have challenges in? Or actually, do you need someone that is a generalist? And really go from that place, and then go and look and just say, based on my industry and based on that high level thing that I need, is there anybody in New Zealand that might have the skill set to help me? And you should be able to, as Jules said, within 30 seconds, click a couple buttons and find out. And we just want people to be curious. That's it. We've made it really easy. And so I would say, just be willing to enter the conversation. That's where it starts.
Yeah, I love that. Like, be curious about, what if there was a different way of getting what our business needs?
Exactly.
What if there was a different way of accessing talent we can't access right now? What if this way is actually going to result in a competitive advantage?
Definitely.
I love that. I love that. Julia, when I say the words motherhood penalty, as a mother of 2, what comes into your mind? What do you think about when you think about these words, motherhood penalty?
So many things. And the first feeling I get is anger. I feel really strongly about this because, as a technical person, as a technology leader, when I was on maternity leave, I was excited to go back to work. I wanted to be at home with my kids. Of course, I love my children, but I love my work and I love what I do and I love building and I love solving problems. And so it's not just about, how can I get back to work to earn money for my kids? It's, how can I get back my entire identity and have balance the mum hat with the work hat and everything else. And the penalty, and I see this all too often, is people in fantastic careers end up going back to work in part-time roles, understandably, because your capacity has halved or more, and you want to be flexible, you want to be close to your kids at school and whatever. And they often end up taking such a step down in their career. And that not only impacts your finances and your finances from being off work, never mind like your KiwiSaver and everything, but your mental health and your overall like just career satisfaction, life satisfaction. And to me, it's making sacrifices for your kids is a given, but making that level of sacrifice that society expects you to, and then expects you to be grateful for it. That's the motherhood penalty, is we're sold something that's not true. And then we're told you can do it all, but actually you can't. You can do everything, but not all at once. And so that's why fractional has been such a big thing for us. I always wanted to be a CTO by the time I was 40. I had my first child and thought, well, I can't do both and be happy in my life. I don't have the capacity for both. And fractional has been basically my opening into an alternative career path. And I talk about this all the time, that now I've just turned 34 and I turned 34 as the CTO of my own company. And there's just no way any of that would have been possible before. So amazing. And I have Michelle to thank for that. Thank you.
Both of us. It's been
I love that answer, Julia, and I love that your first response is anger, and then you've channeled that anger, and that's something you should be very proud of. And I also love your reflections about returning to work, right? Like, and I say this to all my clients, this is complicated. This is not good, bad. This is different because, and also it's one of the first times in our lives where we experience multiple things being true at the same time, right? Like, I love my kids and I love my job. But for those to both exist, I feel like there has to be these other choices that are made, you know? And so I think it is brutal. And I think it, for everyone who's listening, know you're not alone. And it's a system. It's not you. To Julia's point, we're told this works. We're told this works. But in fact, when we get into it, we're like, maybe it's me that's doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Michelle, what about you? Like, when I say the words motherhood penalty, what comes up for you?
Yeah. I mean, it's a heavy one because I am quite sporty and I've always taken this kind of the career game really seriously. And I had kids later in my 30s. And when you get a penalty in a sport, like, you're probably going to lose. You're probably no longer going to be competitive in the game. And like, there's a reality that I had so much passion and pride and interest in my career. And I had so few role models coming up in leadership really young through Silicon Valley. Like, I was managing at a director level by my late 20s, which is really, really unusual. And I felt like I was just running straight into the sun because I was like, the second I have children, this is all over. I don't even have one role model or mentor in the line of business that I'm in that's female that has kids. They all either don't have children or everyone just tells me their horror stories and they're basically like, oh, you're just going to burn out. Like, basically don't even try. So I ran as fast as I possibly could head first into what I assumed would just be quitting the workplace. And when I moved to New Zealand, I had this story in my head of like, I'm just going to run around in a field barefoot with my babies and forget about my ambition. And it's just going to be great. And I'm going to go live in the Shire. And then I was like, what? No, what am I talking about? That is so not me. And that concept of penalty was so psychologically damaging for me before I had children that it actually impacted the decisions that I was making in my career because I felt like there was nothing on the other side. And then as soon as I've gotten to the other side, I'm like, I literally have to show up on the same A game that everyone else on the field is, while sleep deprived, while sick, while everything else, with 2 children under 5. But anyone I'm working with shouldn't know that because I'm a fractional CRO. So if I'm in their company, that's not the point. And this is what was so freeing to me, is that people could just take my experience and they didn't know or care what I was doing with the other 2-3 days of my week. And to me, that unlocked everything, because the penalty is for having to admit and concede that you have this lesser capacity. Whereas if you just work in a game where there's half as many people on the field or half as much time in the game, then you can still play. So to that analogy, the motherhood penalty is like this structure challenge of going, we can't keep women with children playing the same game and expect them to sustainably finish. Like, we will fail if we continue to play in the same game that we've always been told, which is why my mom never was able to continue her career and my grandmother never had a career. Like, I'm the first generation in my family trying to keep a career and have children. And like, the weight of that is just something that we all need to fight, which is this anger you hear in me and Joel's. We have this like extreme rage of changing the system.
Wow. I mean, not gonna lie, Michelle, when I heard you say that and you framed it up as you've spent your 20s running towards the sun,
Yes.
it almost makes me emotional because, wow, you spent your 20s running towards the sun because you knew it wouldn't last, because you looked up and there were no role models. And you were like, right, I better make the most of this kind of thing, because I'm basically going to expire or whatever, like, and then you're like, it's okay, I'm going to move to New Zealand. I'm going to pretend that I don't have this other identity, which is bloody good at what I do. And I love it. And I get a lot of worth from it. And I love helping and all that. And then you went, well, that doesn't work. I can't do that. I can't ignore who I am. And I just want to say thank you for that description and analogy, and this whole idea of when you're on a sports team, if you get a penalty, you're probably going to lose, because I love that frame up. It's so simple, and it makes me really emotional hearing both your stories.
Well, we're in a really raw and beautiful time, and I think that that's the thing, is that when you look in retrospect and you go, this is why I did the things I did, I think there's a lot of power from that. But we're sitting here in the middle of it going, we are so raw and transparent and real and trying to build a system while we are currently being pulled down by it. And I know in 5 years, we're going to look back and go, wow, how amazing what we accomplished, and I think we sit back and we high five ourselves, and we do this right now, that we're like, we're doing amazing work. This is only temporary, that we're in this moment. And like, that's what's getting Jules and I through right now, is just zooming out and realizing what we're doing.
We high five daily because no one else is going to. No one else is going to thank us. No one's going to congratulate us. We're operating entirely in this like quiet little vacuum where nobody sees the impact of the work you're doing till way later. And it's so easy to just give up when you're in it. But as you can hear, we are both full of anger, which we've channeled into passion and drive, and making things better for ourselves, and then being able to make it better for everyone else in that way as well. And we're both in really male dominated fields as well, and that really contributes to the feeling of inequity, inequality, and just wanting to basically push that boulder uphill until we get there.
To Tuku that, I love the high five idea.
Every day.
Yeah, and it reminds me, I actually watched, we are recording this on the 3rd of November, and I watched the All Blacks game versus Ireland yesterday, and I noticed after every little play, they all go around and like touch each other's hands, and like, it's like on doubles in Wimbledon or whatever, the doubles, I always like to have a bit of a high five. Don't underestimate what the strength you can get from that. So I love that. And also, when I hear you both talk about we are working in the system, trying to change the system, it reminds me that I've been very inspired by the Te Ao Māori philosophy of be a good ancestor.
Yes.
And that's what I am driven for, because I don't want this for our children or their children. And we can be good ancestors, I believe, if we try and change the system while in the system. So I really want to support that.
It pulls it together. My sons and my husband are Māori, and we think of this actually quite often, that you imagine orienting yourself instead of walking, blankly into the future. You're orienting yourself backwards and looking backwards at your tupuna. And that orientation is a lot of strength that I myself take, is looking at being the only person for 1,000 years in my generation that have ever tried to challenge the system with the right tools. And it just really brings a lot of context and power to the challenge itself.
Love it. Beautiful. I want to wrap up by giving you both the famous question on how to smash the motherhood penalty, which is, if I gave you a magic wand and you could use that magic wand to give the biggest sort of hole in this thing called the motherhood penalty to really smash it, like, what do you think's the biggest system lever? And it's magic wand, so you can be very magical with this magical wand. That would really mean that, becoming a mother doesn't penalize your career, your finances, your identity, all the things that the motherhood penalty impacts. What would you use your magic wand for? I'm going to go to Michelle first, then I'm going to Julia. Michelle, how would you use your magic wand, my friend?
I would erase the point in time where we decided that there was a 40-hour work week. I would just wish it away. It was never to be. And then we would have such brilliant conversations because we would have no hangups about this concept of part-time or less productive, because there never was a 40-hour work week to start with. And we would just look at work as outcomes and not hours. And yeah, that's what I do.
Love it. That is a great magic wand. You'd wish away the 40-hour work week.
Yep.
You'd say, Henry Ford, we no longer need this concept. I love that. Julia, what about you? What would you use your magic wand for?
Oh, I've been thinking about this for ages because everyone on your podcast has such a great answer, and I didn't want to come up short. But my one's really simple, and it's aligned with Michelle's quite a lot. If I could wave a magic wand, I would have people understand that the hours you sit in front of your computer, the hours you sit in front of your screen, don't quantify how much value you give to your business and to your work. That it's not, like you say, 40 hours a week outcomes. Some of us can deliver the same value in a shorter period of time, or we work in ups and downs. We don't just work consistently through 40 hours a week. I could get an entire week's worth of work done in 8 hours and then continue to do nothing for the rest of the week. So hours is not equal to value.
Yeah. I love that. Hours is not equal to value. It's got to be about the outcomes. It's got to be about all the experience that layers up into someone to create this value. I love that as a magic wand. Thank you, Julia and Michelle, for creating this business.
Thank you for letting us talk about it.
For your anger, because you've turned that anger into goodness. And I think I really encourage, I will put in the show notes all your details, and I really encourage people to reach out to Michelle and Julia if you're an employer, if you're an individual, and get talking to them, because we need more innovation in our workplaces for all genders, for all reasons. This is not just a mum thing. It's not even just a parent thing. And I just really admire your drive, your commitment, your common sense, just not that common. And I'm inspired by your journey. And I thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having us.
And thank you for your podcast. Just the kind of people that you have on here and the messages that you're spreading and the fight that we're all fighting together is amazing. So thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Onwards and upwards. This podcast was funded by Works for Everyone, a business that is dedicated to supporting working parents and to smashing the motherhood penalty. If this is also your jam, let's stay connected. We're on Facebook and Instagram. Just look for us, Works for Everyone. And if you want more information on how we help businesses put a care wrap around their employees, check us out on worksforeveryone.co.nz. Or if none of these work for you, in the weekends you can find me, Emma McLean, the founder of Works for Everyone, in the queue at Pack and Save Royal Oak or Kmart St Luke's. Onwards!